Everyone for participating in our R2 transition webinar today. We have a lot of stuff to cover in a pretty short time. So I'm going to spend about 40 minutes going through the presentation and explaining some of the new requirements of the standard. And then I will leave the last 20 minutes or so for question and answers. So we are coming to you from our headquarters at PJR in Troy, Michigan. My name is Scott Jones. I will be the presenter today. I'm one of the program managers here at Perry Johnson Registrars, as well as a EHS specialist and auditor for R2, as well as 14,001, OSAS 18,001, RIOS, and several other standards that we offer here. So our audience today, we have a pretty diverse group from auditors to clients, potential clients, consultants. We have some of our sales staff on as well today. So I'd like to welcome everybody. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them in the question box on your right. And then I will do my best to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and I unfortunately cannot answer your question, I'll have my information up at the end of the presentation for you to contact me either by email or phone, whatever is more convenient for you, and I will answer your questions the best I can. So today's session we're going to cover the basic overview of the R2 2013 version of the standard. We'll briefly discuss some benefits of certification, and then we'll get in pretty good detail on the specifics of the new requirements of the standard. And then at the end we'll talk about issuance of certification and the certification process. So the certification process not only for those who are new to R2 and looking to get certified, but for those who are looking to transition and upgrade to the new version of the standard. So for those of you who are not familiar with PJR, we are accredited to a wide variety of standards. Obviously your R2 as well as RIOS, which is more of your scrap recycling standard, as well as ISO 14,001, your environmental management standard, OSAS 18,001, which is your health and safety standard. We are also certified to or in the process of getting certified to stewards, ISO 50,001, and then you see a whole array of other standards that we offer. So PGR is currently the #1 R2 registrar throughout the world for the number of companies that we've certified. We have certified companies all over the world, including Australia, Canada, China, all the way to India, Malaysia. We're down to Mexico and Singapore, and European Union. So it's with the new standard for R2, we've seen a tremendous growth of the R2 standard throughout the world, and this is largely due to the number of downstream vendors that are located throughout the world and overseas that the U.S. and some of the other larger countries are sending their FMs to. A lot of the downstream vendors are looking to get certified to streamline the process of the R2 certification. So that is one of the benefits for getting certified. It helps to streamline and the whole recycling process and the downstream vendor chain that a lot of companies have to go through to send material, to make sure that they're sending it to facilities that are properly licensed, that are handling the material properly, and it provides that public confidence, you know, when you have a third party come in there and verify that you're doing things the right way. Helps to guard downstream control of the recycling chain. So as a company, you know and you can feel confident that you're sending material and it's being processed and handled the way that you expect it to be processed. So those are a few of the main things. Along with the certification, it helps you stay in compliance to the legal requirements, to any customer requirements. So those are just some of the benefits to the certification. So about the R2 2013 version, to clarify that there's a lot of confusion with the R2 2008 version of the standard. So the R2 2013 is meant to help improve the understanding of the standard, to help clear up any of the confusion, add a little bit more guidance to the requirements. It came out on July 1st of 2013. This version is not intended to be an management system, similar to your ISO 14000 or your ISO 9000. That's why the new requirement says that you have to get certified to either ISO 14001 and OSAS 18001 or RIOS. So this is one of the key changes and one of the biggest changes of the new version. So anybody who wants to get R2 certified now, whether you are currently certified or looking to get certified, in order to transition to the new version of the standard, you have to have ISO 14001 and OSAS 18001 certifications through a third party like PJR, or you can go RIOS. The idea being that RIOS incorporates, for the most part, ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and OSAS 18001. So by going the RIOS route, you're incorporating those other requirements so that you can do either or. Now there are potential options for going with other standards outside of these. In order to do this, we've heard several companies interested in possibly e-stewards in R2. In order to be able to go e-stewards and R2 and maybe avoid having to get the 14 and 18 or the RIOS, you'd have to get that approved through R2 Solutions, and we can help you with that process. So the new R2 requirements, the provisions themselves haven't changed a whole lot. Some of the specifics within those provisions have changed, especially when it comes to the reusable equipment and components provision, number 6. That seems to be where a majority of the changes come in. So we'll start going through the specifics of each provision to help you understand what some of those new requirements are and what that means to your organization. So provision 1, there was a lot of confusion as to who can get certified to R2, what type of companies, can anybody get certified to R2, and they came out, R2 Solutions came out in the R2 Code of Practices, and they came out with some, basically anybody who handles, manages electronic equipment, but they also came out with some allowances. So brokers who handle folks materials. There's certain stipulations where that you have to go through, but you can get certified also. Collectors, campus is allowed now. Multi-site certification is allowed now. There's a co-location allowance, FM processor allowance. So if you are end of life and everything that you are receiving is being processed, it's being potentially broken down, recycled, smelted, whatever it may be, you're not sending any of that equipment for reuse or resale. Obviously, the provision 6 would not apply for reuse, provision 8 for data destruction. If you're not receiving any data, obviously there's certain provisions that would not apply to you then. Those provisions have to be, those allowances have to be stated on your certificate though. So it says what you are basically excluded from within the standard. In R2 2013, electronic recyclers shall be certified, like I was saying, to one or more EHS management system standards. Since R2 does not specifically address document control, record control, management reviews, those type of things, that's why it's expected that you have one or more EHS management systems along with the R2. So that was provision 1. That was pretty much the significant change there in provision 1. Provision 2, one key thing that I want to reiterate that wasn't always clear in the first version is that electronic recyclers shall take all practical steps to direct tested equipment and components to reuse and resale. If you are receiving equipment, you have to have some sort of stipulation and reasoning for not sending something to reuse or resale if it has the potential to. You cannot just say everything we receive we automatically dismantle and send downstream for further processing. You have to evaluate the equipment in some way and ensure that that equipment, whether it's not economically feasible or whatever it may be, that it doesn't make sense for you to spend the time to refurbish that, to resell it, or to send it for reuse. So that's one step that needs to be in there. Also, again, you shall not direct material to incineration, energy recovery, or land disposal unless reuse or recycling is not not a viable option. Legal requirements, provision 3. You still have to develop your list of legal requirements and identify all your requirements. You need to have a legal compliance plan that will help you maintain full compliance to all your EHS, your environmental health and safety requirements, and the new provision adds data security requirements, which I think in the other standard would be more on the other requirements, but this specifically calls out that you need your data security legal requirements in there that are applicable to your operation. And also making sure that you identify all your import-export requirements. So not only that you can export something to another country, but that that company, if they're in another country, can import that material. So you need objective evidence to ensure that that's being done. So we've talked about the data security legal requirements being added. The legality of import and exports must be verified. And now this is for all OECD countries and non-OECD countries. The previous version more focused on the non-OECD countries. A lot of companies thought they didn't have to go through a lot of that similar due diligence for the OECD countries, but there are still requirements within the OECD countries as far as what can be imported, exported. So you need to be conscious of that and making sure that you are identifying what those requirements are and that you are showing objective evidence that you can legally export that equipment and they can import it. It shall also, the organization shall also periodically audit its compliance with legal requirements and take corrective action to address any issues of non-compliance. So as you're going through your compliance evaluation, you have to ensure that you are taking the proper steps and that your company is in compliance to all your legal requirements. Your list of legal requirements, or however you document your legal requirements, should not just be the specific legal requirements. You need to make sure that you are identifying how you are going to meet those requirements and what those requirements are to be in compliance. So on to provision 4, on-site environmental health and safety. So you need to make sure that you are adhering to good housekeeping standards, that all work areas and storage areas are kept clean. And one of the new additions is that you have a planned and regularly implemented and monitored housekeeping procedure. So for all the areas, you have how all employees are aware of what the housekeeping procedures are, they're following those, and then you're monitoring those regularly. 4C says the organization shall conduct on an ongoing basis a hazards identification and assessment. So risk could include emissions of and/or exposure to substances, noise, ergonomic factors, thermal stress, substandard machine guarding, cuts and abrasions. So basically every process, every equipment, and that's for routine and non-routine activities, need to be assessed for the risks that they pose on your facility and your employees, and also on the environment. So this is not necessarily a new requirement, but it goes into more than what was identified in the original version. So we need to make sure we're looking at those ergonomic factors, especially when it comes to the equipment with machine guarding and everything else, making sure that you've identified that. If you have contractors coming on site, it may not be a routine activity, but those hazards of what the activities that they're going to be doing need to be assessed before they perform the work. So those are some of the type of assessments that need to be done. And then 4CL says that the electronics recycler shall prepare, periodically test, and update as appropriate and necessary an emergency plan for responding to identified emergencies. So these are not only potential everyday emergencies, but for exceptional circumstances as well. It could be severe weather, or I've seen some that have bomb threats, or those are just some examples of types of exceptional circumstances that you should have emergency plan in place for. So as far as the R2 focus materials, we still have the CRTs. We also have batteries, mercury-containing devices, switches, relays, laptops, bulbs, PCBs, and then circuit boards. So circuit boards, and circuit boards can be a little bit tricky at times. A lot of circuit boards are coming out that may not have as many or all the hazardous components that the older ones had. So you need to be careful of identifying what type of circuit boards they are and how they're being handled. So an R2 2013 electronics recycler shall send removed FMs to processing, recovery, and treatment facilities that meet all applicable regulatory requirements. So for mercury-containing devices, you can send it for mercury retorting, or basically, except for any, you can send them downstream for processing except incineration. So for circuit boards, removal of batteries and mercury, and processing for metals recovery. For PCBs, basically the requirement is that you send them downstream to a facility that has the technology designed for PCB destruction, and of course occurring at facilities that meet the legal requirements. So for your selection and ongoing due diligence of downstream vendors, this hasn't changed drastically. There's some minor changes. One is that downstream vendors need to adhere to a documented system to manage EHS risk and legal requirements. So you need to make sure that the downstream vendors that you are using are following some sort of documented EHS system. It could be they follow your system, but they have to have some system that they are following. Comply with all applicable environmental and health and safety legal requirements. So, and maintain a current list of its environmental permits and copies of each. So, if you're using the downstream vendor, you need to make sure that you are, as part of your due diligence, obtaining this list, making sure they have copies of their permits, make sure that they are in compliance with the legal requirements, and that they are meeting all these requirements. 5E6, conform to Provision 7, which is your tracking throughput. So documenting the flow of all FMs down the recycling chain. So you, not only tracking that the material you are sending goes to, say, your first tier, but also if your first tier is sending that for further processing, that tracking is done till the end of life of that product. An end of life, whether it's being smelted, recycled, whether it's being sent for reuse or resale. Once it becomes a commodity, that's basically when that's the end of life for that product. And then conform to Provision 10 for physical security, ensuring security of the equipment down the recycling chain. So this includes transportation. If you are sending hard drives or material that has equipment that has data on it, and you're sending that downstream, you need to make sure that however you're transporting it, that it stays secure. If from the time that you receive it till it's destroyed, basically, that equipment and that data is secure. So 5F, an R2 electronics recycler shall confirm, so at least annually, and document through audits or similarly effective means that each downstream vendor that you use conforms to these requirements. So whether you do an initial on-site audit of the downstream vendor to verify this, and possibly subsequent off-site audits, or there's really no specific requirement that it states here, but you need to be able to show objective evidence and confirm that they are following these requirements. If the R2 2013 electronics recycler uses an R2 2013 certified downstream vendor or facility, then verification of conformance to 5E1 and 5E6 satisfies the due diligence requirements. So 5E1 and 5E6 basically mean that, so for 5E1 that you identify the focus material plan, that you understand how that material is being processed downstream, that you verify that that facility is, the downstream vendor is actually certified. You get objective evidence of that certification, whether it's a copy of the certificate and last audit report, non-conformances that were identified in the last audit, but you need to be able to show that objective evidence that they are certified and that they are handling the material properly and that they're handling it in the way that you have specified. Not only that they are, but that all of their downstream vendors to end of life are. And then 5E6 with tracking throughput, making sure that just because you send it to the Tier 1 who's certified to R2 2013 doesn't mean that your due diligence stops there. You still have to follow through to the end of life and track that material to ensure that it's being disposed of properly or recycled properly or however it's being handled. So for non-focused materials requiring specific management, say for print cartridges, toner cartridges, you need to make sure that they are being sent to a facility, whether to the OEM or to a facility that is processing them with the proper technology, and they're processing it safely and effectively, and then that facility has basically meets all the applicable requirements. So there's still a fair amount of due diligence that's required for these non-FMs, such as toner cartridges, but it's not as extensive as your FM handlers. Provision 6, like I was saying at the beginning, this is one of the biggest provisions that have had the most significant changes. So as far as sending it for reuse, resale, with respect to the equipment and components that you're shipping downstream, you have to label and sort each shipment in a manner that's sufficient to track throughput. So whether it's each shipment, each container, each piece of equipment that you're sending, however, you need to be able to make sure that you are tracking that shipment effectively. Ensure that all data is sanitized, and we'll get to Provision 8 here in a few minutes, and then handle and package shipments to prevent damage in conformity with Provision 12. So as part of the R2 2013, auditors should be looking at how you are packaging the equipment, so especially for, say, CRTs, that they are not being damaged in the process, and then having the hazardous material being exposed to humans, environment. Toner cartridges, making sure that those, if a box is dropped and you have toner all over the place, making sure that it's packaged in a way that will prevent that leakage. Provision 6, reusable equipment and components again. So now we're getting into the different classifications that you can have. So you can have either tested for full functions, R2 ready for reuse, tested for key functions, R2 ready for resale, and or evaluated and non-function, so R2 ready for repair. So you have reuse, resale, and repair. So your reuse is that every function on that piece of equipment is working properly. You've tested it, you've confirmed and verified that that equipment is fully functioning. So let's say it's a cell phone. Every function on that, the camera, the phone, everything is working properly. If laptops, same thing. All the functions are working properly. The camera, if there's a camera on there, the camera's working properly. You have the legally licensed software on that computer, and the device-specific drivers are on there as well. So everything is working. So as part of this, we now have to implement a written quality assurance plan, or that's part of the RIO standard, or in addition, you could get the ISO 9001. It's not saying you have to be certified to either one of these, but you need to have a written quality assurance plan. One way of doing this is to be certified to ISO 9001 or RIOS. And the quality assurance plan should verify the accuracy of the test methods, the equipment and results, making sure that the equipment's calibrated, that you are having some sort of possible sampling plan to make sure that your test methods are effective, whatever that may be. And then also to implement a written product return plan and policy. So that's appropriate for the equipment and components for final destination. So not only do we have to ensure that the testing is done properly and effectively, but also that if there are any that slip through that are not meeting the requirements, that we have a return policy in place for that. So, and this cannot just be a verbal, this has to be a written plan for both of these, for the quality assurance plan and the product return plan. And then ensure that all the equipment and components are clean and free of major cosmetic defects. And this is specifically for the reuse section. And then making sure that it meets the requirements of the recipient. So if they are asking for something specific, we we should, as an auditor, we should be able to go in there and make sure that the equipment you set them meets that contract or that what they ordered. So those are the major changes for the reuse, and that's basically, it comes in, it's looks in great condition, there's no major defects, everything's working properly, you've done your quality assurance on it, and you've included a return policy, you can send it out, and you should be good to go. For resale, this is taking into account items that have minor cosmetic defects that may have certain functions that are not working, but those functions are not important to the end recipient. The end recipient, you know, let's say they're looking for a cell phone, the camera's not working, but they don't care if the camera's not working. They just want to know that they have a functioning phone. So that's an item that can go for resale. But if that component is, the camera is not working, they need to be made aware of that. And then again, you need to use effective test methods in testing equipment to confirm that the key functions of the equipment or components are working properly. And then again, with this element, you need to have a quality assurance plan again, and then disclose in writing to buyers any functions that are not working properly, and provide a description of cosmetic defects. So that buyers should receive it knowing exactly what they're getting. There should not be any surprises as far as a broken screen or a crack on something that they're not aware of. Missing components, you know, the camera is not working, or CD-ROM drive or whatever it might have been was taken out. I mean, they need to be aware of all this information. And then for this component as well, you need to have that product return plan and policy in place. And then finally, making sure that that equipment is meeting the end user specifications. And as auditors, is another thing that we'll be looking for to make sure that those the equipment that's being sent out, whether it's for resale or reuse, is meeting those customer requirements. And then finally, for repair, if you're sending equipment downstream for repair, it's not ready, it is not going to meet the customer requirements as is, it needs refurbishing, it needs additional work, you can send that downstream, but again, you need to implement a written quality assurance plan and policy, have that in place. You need to confirm that the sales price of the unit or component is capable of repair and refurbishment in the destination market. If you're sending it to another country, there's certain equipment that may be in high demand over there, but we need to make sure that the standard wants to make sure that it's economically feasible and it makes sense for you to do that. And then confirm through an appropriate combination of contractual agreements, detailed marketing, materials tracking, record keeping, and auditing that equipment and components containing FMs are only shipped to electronics recyclers that are certified to R2 2013, or recipient vendors that can assure that all equipment and components shall be resold in conformance with the resale or reuse section. So if you're sending equipment for repair, there's still some due diligence that's going to need to be done on that downstream company that you're using. If they're fixing the equipment, refurbishing it, you want to make sure and view records that they are handling that material, they're refurbishing that material properly, they're selling it to an end user and it's meeting their requirements and their specifications, and basically it's trying to avoid you sending equipment downstream and then thinking it's going for reuse or resale and having it end up in a landfill or in a stream or river somewhere. So that's kind of what they're trying to avoid. Or recipient vendors that can manage all equipment and components containing FMs and residual FMs resulting from repair refurbishing operations. So obviously if you're sending equipment for repair, there's going to be components that aren't working properly that they're going to have to send downstream for further processing, or they're going to have to process it themselves. So in essence, they are one of your downstream vendors for FM materials. So the similar due diligence in Provision 5 will need to be met. So there are some exemptions. For example, collectible electronics or equipment, specialty electronics, a lot of vintage electronics that collectors may be obtaining. If it's less than 1% of your total amount of inventory that's sold over 1 year or 12 months, that it can be excluded. Now, if you're selling 5% or 10%, that cannot be excluded. So you don't need to do the due diligence on a company or a person that you are sending less than 1% of your equipment to if it's considered collectible or vintage specialty equipment. So for equipment that's ready for reuse, ready for resale, you do not need to conform to Provision 5 because you are assuming that the material you are sending is going to be reused, that it meets the customer's requirements, and it's either fully functioning or the key functions are working properly to meet their requirements. So the due diligence on those do not need to be done. So for tracking throughput, this is one of the more challenging aspects to address throughout the standard, and one of the more challenging things that a lot of clients have a difficult time accomplishing. So for at least 3 years, an R2 organization that's certified to R2 must maintain their commercial contracts, bills of lading, other commercially accepted documentation for all transfers of equipment, components, and materials. Obviously, if you're just starting this process, you're just starting the R2 2013 certification process, you're most likely not going to have, maybe you will, but you might not have that 3 years worth of contracts or bills of lading, whatever it might be. For that, it's acceptable not to have that 3 years as long as you have sufficient data going back at least several months or to when you started implementing the standard to show that you are meeting the requirements. And then obviously moving forward, you'll have to maintain that for 3 years going back. And then Part B, in R2 2013 electronics recycler shall provide to each customer upon request and with appropriate intellectual property controls as required by the disclosure the names and locations of all downstream vendors in the recycling chain that handles the customer's FMs that pass through the recycler's facility. So for any of your customers that you were receiving equipment from, if you're going to have them as your customer and they request your downstream vendor information, you are required to provide them that information if you want to be R2 2013 certified. If you choose not to provide them that information, that's fine, but you cannot have them as your customer. So basically at that point it becomes a business decision. But if they are your customer and they request that information, you are required to provide that. For data destruction, Provision 8, there's not a whole lot that has changed in this provision. You still need to follow the NIST Special Publication 800-88 or a similar standard for data destruction. Your data destruction procedures need to be documented. Any employee who is involved in the data destruction process needs to be trained and evaluated for competency. And if data destruction is being done downstream, you need to make sure that whoever is doing that at the other facility is also properly trained and their competency has been evaluated. And then the process needs to be reviewed and validated by an independent party on a periodic basis. Again, the same with the old standard. Independent does not mean a third party. It means someone independent of that process. It could be an internal person. It could be an external person, but they need to be independent of that data destruction process. Quality controls need to be documented, implemented, and monitored. So you need to have quality controls, whether it's a sampling methodology that you're using to ensure that the data destruction process is working effectively. Whatever controls you put in place, they need to be documented, and you need to be making sure that you're monitoring those to make sure that they are being effective. Security controls also need to be documented, implemented, and maintained. So depending on the sensitive classification of that media, that data, you need to make sure that you are securing that from the time that you receive it. So even if it's on your facility or if you're sending it downstream for data destruction, that needs to be, the process needs to be controlled and that data needs to be secured in some way. And then also you need to maintain adequate records of data destruction. So for each downstream vendor, if they're doing it, you need to make sure that you are receiving some sort of evidence that that material is being destroyed properly and that it is actually being destroyed. So whether it's a certificate of destruction or whatever that might be, you need to have some objective evidence of that and maintain those records. So if data destruction is handled by a downstream vendor, if you are receiving that material and you're sending it downstream, you can do that, but once you receive it, it's your responsibility until that data, that media is destroyed. So even if you're sending downstream, once that downstream vendor receives it, that doesn't relinquish your responsibility. Your responsibility stays with it until it is fully destroyed. So media or devices containing media with data must be tracked and secured during transportation, storage, and processing, which I just touched on. So throughout that whole process, that needs to be secure, whether it's locked in a cage, whether it's locked in its own container, but it needs to be controlled and secured. And then each downstream vendor that you use must also adhere to the provision 8, whether they are R2 certified or not. So for storage, provision number 9, it's still pretty similar. Protect from atmospheric conditions, floods. Make sure that you're storing in. Make sure you're storing the material legally. Making sure that access to the equipment is controlled, especially when it comes to data. Making sure that all the containers are labeled, storage areas are identified, and then also making sure that with the labeling and storage that you're meeting legal requirements. For example, CRTs, batteries have their own legal requirements surrounding labeling and how long you can have them on site. So making sure that you are conscious of those requirements. Facility security, making sure that access to the facility is controlled, whether it's through camera, you have the key fobs, however you do that, making sure that, again, sensitive media is secure, and that's one of the biggest stressors, I guess I could say, on the new standard, is making sure that media containing device data is secured and stored properly. Provision 11, we're talking about insurance, closure plan, and financial responsibilities. So it's expected that you will have evaluated the risks on site to determine what your adequate level of insurance is to cover your liabilities, which includes environmental pollution and worker health and safety. Now, there are some exemptions from having environmental pollution. If you've evaluated your risks and you've worked with an insurance company and they've evaluated your risks and they feel that you do not need environmental pollution, there are ways around that. So it's not absolutely required, as was always the previous thought process with the previous version of R2. So make sure that you are evaluating your activities on site to know what your true risks are and what insurance that you truly need. Develop and maintain a current written plan and a sufficient financial instrument that assures proper closure of the facility, ensures against abandonment of any electronic equipment and components. So it's not just having a closure plan. If you have to close your business for whatever reason, it's not just a closure plan to make sure that internally you do things properly. It's to prevent that, but also abandonment. So that for some reason you have to walk away, that you have a closure plan and you have the financial instrument to be able for someone to properly close that facility. So, and these costs should include how to process the remaining inventory, sampling for environmental contamination, any site remediation that may need to be done if there are any contaminants on site that have gotten into the soil or groundwater possibly, and then to restore the premise to a sellable condition. So the financial instrument should be able to cover these costs, as well as potentially any costs associated with the people responsible for closing that facility. And then you have your closure plan. So that should consider the risks identified in Section A, including details assigning responsibility for closure. So you need to identify someone who's independent, a third-party person who's responsible for closing that facility, who has the financial instruments to be able to close the facility properly, and then the plans for inventory processing, environmental sampling, site remediation, all those things. So the closure plan should break down all these steps on how someone could properly close the facility. So one thing I do want to add for the closure plan, if you're designating a third party or an independent person to close that facility, you need to make sure that you have some sort of objective evidence that they've accepted this responsibility. So you're not just saying, oh, this person is going to do it without any formal acceptance from them of that responsibility. Whether it's could be a bank, could be your parent company, that is an option. If you want to put that responsibility to your parent company, that is an option. But if obviously if you're a smaller company and you have one facility, you don't have that luxury. So you have to identify a third party to do that. Transport, you must verify that your transporters, including your own fleet, have all the necessary regulatory authorizations. You have the proper licenses and permits for your vehicles. You have the proper insurance coverage for your vehicles. And that whether you're using a transporter, a broker, your own fleet, that you've verified that they have an acceptable safety record for the past 3 years. This can be a little challenging, especially as R2 expands to other countries that may not have the tracking of the safety records like some countries do. So if if you can't physically obtain from a database that they have a safe driving record, you should be able to get objective evidence from that company in some way that they have that evidence. For brokers, it becomes a little bit challenging. A lot of times they'll use multiple transportation companies, but you should understand how they go about evaluating their transporters that they use to ensure that they have a safe record. And then finally, Provision 13 addresses documentation and record keeping. Previously it was record keeping, now it's documentation and record keeping. So the R2 2013 electronics recycler shall have access at the certified facility to documents and records necessary to demonstrate conformity to each requirement of this document. So if we're going on site to audit your facility, you should have all the documents we need at that facility. So for R2 certification, so those are the 13 provisions of the standard and the main differences between R2 2008 and R2 2013. Obviously, there's a lot more requirements that I didn't cover. I just tried to focus on some of the key changes from the old version to the new version. But along with the standard changes, there's also some certification changes that have happened as well. So we'll cover some of those right now. So if you are, so companies who are in the process of getting certified to R2 2008, at this point, you have until the end of the year. You have until December 31st to get certified to 2008. After the end of the year, everybody has to go get certified to 2013, and that's for initial certification. So any company who is already certified and is looking to upgrade and transition to the R2 2013 basically has 18 months from when the standard was released. So you have until December 31st, 2014 to upgrade or to transition into the new version R2 2013. So if you have your next audit is coming up, let's say in January of this year, and you're not quite ready, that's fine. You can have your January audit to the R2 2008 version. However, you then need to have a second audit. It could be towards the end of the year in 2014, maybe November, December, where you transition to the R2 2013. So you could have, it doesn't mean that we will not audit to R2 2008 at all after the end of the year. It just means that by the end of 2014, you have to have had that transition audit to R2 2013. So as part of the new requirements, to become an R2 2013 a certified company, you have to obtain a licensing agreement with R2 Solutions. And that is effective as of July 1st, 2013. So even if you are going to the 2008 version at this point, or your next audit is to 2008 and you're not upgrading or transitioning yet, you still have to obtain that licensing agreement. The licensing agreement applies to, effective July 1st, 2013, to R2 2008 and R2 2013. So I think that a lot of companies, a lot of people had a lot of confusion with that. So make sure that if you are currently certified or looking to get certified, that you're obtaining that license agreement with R2 Solutions. And you can go on their website. There's an application form that you need to fill out, and then you'll have to pay the licensing fee to R2 Solutions. Issuance of certification and notice to R2 Solutions. So the CB shall verify that the certification candidate's license agreement with R2 Solutions is current during any audit. So anytime we go in for an audit, that's one of the first things we're going to look at, is to make sure that you have a licensing agreement in place. If you do not have a licensing agreement in place, that'll probably end up in a suspension of your certificate until you obtain that licensing agreement. For multi-site certifications, you shall clearly identify a controlling site, so whatever site you want to identify as your main site, as your headquarters, and then each site listing will clearly demonstrate any difference in the scope of activities between the sites. So each site must be fully audited before added to the multi-site certificate. So prior to being able to go to a multi-site scheme, where we do a sampling of all your sites, so if you had 10 sites, if you have your headquarters, say, plus 10 sites, we're going to do a sampling. So for your annual surveillance, we may do headquarters plus 2, or for research, we may do headquarters plus 3. So we can, R2 now offers that option. However, before you can go into that multi-site, every site has to be certified and has to be audited to the R2 standard, and then you can incorporate all the sites into a multi-site. One difference with the normal multi-site scheme versus the R2 multi-site is that every site has to be audited within a 3-year cycle. So you may not be going with the normal multi-site because you may have to add an additional site for a surveillance or for a recertification to meet that requirement. So every site must be audited within a 3-year cycle. And then campus certification shall clearly identify the main processing location again, so your headquarters, whatever it might be, and follow any applicable requirements within the R2 Code of Practices. So your multi-site is basically when all your sites do a very similar or the same activity or function. Campus certifications, you have several facilities generally within a metropolitan area that do different activities that together create the whole of your processes. And then if any allowances are used, each allowance will be documented on the certificate. Issuance of multi-site sampling certifications. Multi-site certifications must have one EH&S management system and shared documented processes among all locations in the multi-site certification. So you might have 10 sites, but if all 10 of them have their own set of documentation, they cannot be considered part of the multi-site. You have to have one set of documentation for your management system for all your sites. And then if you want to add new sites, anytime a new site is added, that site must be audited before it's incorporated into the multi-site certification. So that kind of covers a lot of the changes for the R2 standard, and then also the R2 Code of Practices, which covers more of the certification processes than the changes from there. For those of you who are not familiar with the certification process as a whole, I'm going to briefly touch on that, and I want to open it up to any questions before we run out of time. So with any of our certifications for the environmental standards, so there's 14,001, 18,001, there you will have to go through a Stage 1 and Stage 2 audit. This is your initial certification process, your initial certification audit. So your Stage 1 is more or less a documentation review. We're going to look at your documents to make sure that the procedures are in place and that you have an effective system, set of procedures that meet the requirements of the standard. And then when it comes time for that stage 2, we're going to look at the implementation of those procedures to make sure that basically you're doing what you said you were going to do and that you're meeting the requirements of the standard. The stage 1 basically is to make sure that you are ready for the stage 2. The stage 2, we like to schedule 30 to 75 days out. With R2 now, there's a requirement that if a certain number of findings are identified in the stage 1, that we have a minimum of 6 weeks between the stage 1 and stage 2. So your stage 2 is a full system audit, so we're auditing your entire system, all your processes, the entire standard. And then prior to issuing you your certification, we'll have to ensure that all nonconformities that are identified are closed. So we have minor and major nonconformances. So for minor nonconformances, we would just need a corrective action plan to ensure that you are managing that nonconformance properly. If it's a major, it may require a revisit, potentially on-site, off-site, depending on what the nonconformance is. And then once you are certified, you will have generally annual surveillance audits, or if you chose, you could do semi-annual audits every 6 months. These are partial system audits. We're more focusing on key elements of the requirements of the standard, such as your risk assessments, internal audits, management review, those type of things, as well as downstream vendors, and then also any areas where you had nonconformances in the past or that might be of concern for this audit. We're going to want to focus on those areas. But we're not going to be auditing every process, every aspect of your system for surveillance audits. So you'll have 2 surveillance audits if they're annual, and then that 3rd year you'll have your recertification audit, which is again a full system audit of your management system, and basically the cycle repeats. So every 3 years you'll have a recertification audit. So now I would like to open it up to questions. I know we covered a lot in a short amount of time. If you have questions, if you have multiple questions, please feel free to email me or call me. It looks like we have a couple questions already. So what percentage of companies have semi-annual surveillance audits, and what drives their requirements? Semi-annual, honestly, a smaller percentage have, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's a smaller percentage that have semi-annual. Some companies like the semi-annual. Sometimes a year is a long ways to go, especially with the management system. There's a lot of requirements, and there's a lot of upkeep on the management systems. So it kind of ensures that you stay focused and meeting those requirements. That's one aspect that we see companies choosing that. The semi-annual surveillance audits are usually less time. If your normal annual surveillance is a day and a half, your semi-annual might be a day. Or if your your annual surveillance is 2 full days, your semi might be 1 day each. So the time might equal. The additional costs that you might incur, depending on where your auditor is located, might be travel. But a lot of times it's not too drastic of a difference. Sometimes it's just a matter of personal preference. But if after auditing your facility, you're having no nonconformances, or two minor nonconformances, and then all of a sudden you're having 4 majors, or 10 minors, 4 majors, something like that seems excessive, we're going to want to visit. We're probably going to want to change that schedule semi-annually to make sure that that management system is being implemented effectively. All right. Does all data need to be destructed through the customer, although the customer has confirmed in writing that they not require this? If the customer does not require it, that is fine, as long as you have that in writing, and that can be verified by the auditor. Basically, if your customer does not want it, and they can get potentially a cheaper price for not having it sanitized, and they don't care about the data that's on there, that's their own concern, so that's not really an issue. For R2, ready for refurbishment, could you just sell an entire load under this title without testing it, provided we have downstream due diligence? And verify our downstream due diligence, verify our downstream has a quality assurance plan and is testing it appropriately. If you're sending it for refurbishment, you're sending a whole lot without even really looking at it. As long as you are sending it to a downstream vendor who you've approved and you've gone through the due diligence to ensure that they are meeting the requirements of the R2 standard, and that any material that is not going, that they are not refurbishing, or not able to refurbish and resell or reuse, that you're tracking that material to end of life. So you're verifying that that material that is not being refurbished is going to the end of life, going to through further processing by recyclers who are meeting the requirements of the standard. So it is possible as long as you are doing your proper due diligence. All right, let's go to the next one. Do I get a copy of the presentation for my records? Does it include the audio? This presentation will be available excuse me, on our website within probably by the end of the week. It should be on our website with the audio. If you just want the presentation, you want it immediately, you can shoot me an email. I will email you a PDF copy of the presentation so you can have that for your records for reference if you would like. But that, yeah, it will be available for everybody on our website with the audio. You mentioned an exemption for pollution insurance. What needs to be done to still fulfill this requirement? Our company poses almost no risk. This is always the pollution insurance is quite expensive, obviously, and there are some companies that don't warrant it. The type of material that they are handling and processing, and the amount of processing that they're doing is very minimal. So the risks are going to be very minimal. You need to have, whether you do a risk assessment and share that with your pollution insurance or your insurance company, or the insurance company comes on site and does their risk assessment, they'll have to verify. You have to get verification from the insurance company that you are not required to have it. Excuse me. And the auditor, when they're on site, would want to see this verification and this objective evidence that it was indicated that you are not required to have it. Who do I contact in PGR to get certified to do R2 audits? I've already audited a recycler in ISO 9001 for 3 years and know all this stuff. If you are interested in auditing, you can shoot me an email. I'll take a look at, get in touch with you. I'll take a look at your resume and kind of see what your background is, and we can go from there. But yeah, anybody who has the interest of auditing, please feel free to email me. We're always looking for good candidates for auditing. Next question, what type of proof do I need from my customers that they are selling reuse items in accordance with the standard? For reuse, there's less objective evidence that you'll need, because the reuse is basically stating that you've tested the key functions that they are looking for, and the product that you're selling them is meeting their requirement. Now, I'm not sure if you're talking about reuse or repair, but if it's reuse, you're sending that equipment basically knowing that the key functions are working, the key functions that that client or that customer is looking for, and then making sure that you have your quality assurance plan in place and your product return policy in place. So that's the majority of the due diligence that's required. A lot of it, by the time you sell it, you should have already done most of that. So as I see this, it appears to only be a requirement of electronic suppliers. Is this correct? We are a rubber manufacturer currently certified ISO 9001 and 14001. Does this affect does this affect us? If you are a rubber manufacturer and you do not deal with electronic equipment at all, then no, this would not apply. R2 responsible recycling is only for electronic equipment and the components, making sure that is basically being handled and disposed of and recycled properly. Question, can you expand on the downstream due diligence requirements, specifically as it relates to 5H? What are the downstream due diligence requirements for toner and toner ink from print cartridge? Basically, if you're looking at toner and print cartridges, they are considered non-FMs, but they have their own specific requirements. They're less intense as your typical FM materials, sending those to downstream vendors. For your toner cartridges, basically you need to ensure that wherever you are sending this, that you need to understand how they're processing it for one, that they have the technology to be able to process it. That's the main thing. You need to track the throughput going to that facility. So as I say, it's for non-FMs, like toner and toner cartridges, you just have to track it through the first tier. And then making sure that the company that's processing it has the proper the proper licenses and permits in place. So you need to be able to verify all this information for toner and toner cartridges. Yes, I apologize. Someone asked for my email address. Here's my contact information. You can contact myself. I'm the environmental specialist here at Perry Johnson Registrars and one of the program managers for some of our environmental standards. I'm also a lead auditor for R2, actually for ISO 9001, ISO 14001, OSS 18001, R2, RIOS, eStewards, and ISO 50001, which is energy management standard. So please feel free to contact me, or you can contact Charter Rao as well if you have any additional questions or are interested in becoming an auditor. Apologize, I'm just going through some of the additional questions. The question, do you have to disclose non-FM downstream vendors? That is a very good question. At this point, it basically talks about your FM materials. I would have to look into that a little bit further. It's obviously this new standard, and there's going to be a lot of questions on all sides, including our side. So that is a good question. If Don, if you could email me, I will, with your contact information, I will look into that and get back to you. Next question, does PGR do eSteward certification? We are in the process of getting certified to eStewards. We are currently undergoing our witness audit for eStewards right now with ANAB. Once that's done and we address any concerns, we should be officially certified within a couple of months, I would say. I'm going to answer a couple questions here. We're running out of time. I apologize if I did not get to your question. If I did not, please email me. I will be more than happy to answer your question. I'll get back to you within a day or two. I'll try to do my best to get back to everybody today if you have questions, but in the future, if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. For compliance with Provision 6, reuse, what are the criteria for the functionality of the rechargeable battery in the cell phone or laptop? Just that it turns on or that it meets a longevity requirement for operating the electronic device. The standard doesn't specify any specific requirement for the battery life that it should have on there. I guess that's kind of up to the organization to determine that, and then also the customer needs. Ideally, there should be some criteria to determine that that can go for reuse. If it can only turn on and then it shuts off 5 minutes later, that's probably not going to be a valid battery that should go for reuse or resale. But if it's has 80%, yeah, I mean, that could be a good criteria. So it's hard to say. There's really no specified criteria for that. That's kind of up to the organization. All right. Well, I apologize again if I did not get to your question. We kind of ran out of time here. So please, if I did not get to your question, shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll be more than happy to help you out. We'll be having future webinars. We'll be having another one probably sometime early 2014 on the R2 guidance document, going over some of the specifics of that. So keep an eye out for that. If you haven't signed up for our newsletters and updates on our website, please do that, and that'll keep you informed of any webinars that we're having, including any of the environmental, not just R2, but any 14,001, e-stewards, any of the other webinars that we may be having. Again, I appreciate everybody for their time today. I look forward to, I'm sure, receiving some of your questions and responses. And again, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.